I must start with an apology, and that is that for the men in the audience will realise man flu is a very serious disease. Women will realise it's closely related to the common cold. But I apologise if I sound a little hoarse. Thank you, Colin. Depressing beginning. That's always nice to start the day with a downbeat note. I teach, amongst other things, global trends to business leaders at Cambridge. And every time I go back to refresh my presentation, I get even more depressed myself. So I think it is important to be reminded that this stuff matters, and I'll come onto that a bit myself. The question I've been asked to answer is it possible to deliver cost savings through sustainable development policies and initiatives? It's clearly a very good question. And in the current climate, it's likely to be the first question that any budget holder asks when bumping up against sustainability. So it's very timely. I think, therefore, I'd better start by answering the question. The answer to the question is a resounding yes. It is possible to deliver cost savings, but I would argue that it's not just the narrow cost savings, important though they are, that we need to focus on. I'd like to give you a few practical examples, because I think we need to be recognising and celebrating those. They're important. But I think also to recognise that the way in which the public sector delivers services efficiently and effectively isn't just about cost in the short term. There's a long-term cost implication as well, which we need to recognise. And for those of you who have to date and continue to deliver cost savings around this agenda, we need to recognise, as I'm sure you do, that these are the foothills of what we need as an economy and as a government to deliver if we're going to decarbonise the economy effectively by 2050, which is effectively what we are going to need to do. So first, just in case you didn't get too downbeat as a result of Colin's presentation, let me add to that. Between India and Bangladesh, there are a number of kind of political and other niggles, one of which was an island called Newmore Island, which was contested until April this year, when it disappeared at low tide completely. And so Newmore Island has now been taken off the list of political irritants between India and Bangladesh. Maybe that's good news, I'm not entirely sure. If you go onto the Cabinet Office website, there's a very interesting graph there of what the government considers to be the primary risks to the UK. And it includes things like coastal flooding and inland flooding and increased animal disease, all of which, and many others of which, are direct consequences of our failure or potential failure to get to grips with the need to get carbon out of the system. If you go to the DEFRA website, it's been looking hard at the implications for our agriculture and water supply of a changing climate, and of course they're pretty dire. Anybody notice the price of petrol or diesel recently? There's a very interesting annual report that the US military brings out called JOE, the Joint Operating Environment. And JOE 2010 said an interesting thing. It said that the US military, which, by the way, is the world's largest consumer of petrol, has worked out, or its view is that over the next 2 or 3 years, we will start to run down global oil reserves, and by 2015, that's likely to have a profound impact on price. Now, they don't call it peak oil. Other people call it that. But it would seem that we're at a moment when, if you're in the oil purchasing or energy-using business, then things are about to start to change. And I'm not sure whether to be reassured or not reassured that within the next few years, 40% of global oil consumption will come from deep water wells. Anybody got any BP shares? I live down in southern Kent, and if I stand on tiptoes from the top of the downs where I live, I can see Dungeness Power Station. We defend Dungeness Power Station 24 hours a day with bulldozers now against the sea. Unchecked, left unchecked, climate change would lead to an estimated 1 billion migrants by 2050. 1 in 9 of the then world's population, it is estimated, will have to have moved, mostly away from failing agricultural rural economies, but also away from coasts that are disappearing. Thames Water recently opened a desalination plant at Beckton. Very good. And I suppose a bit of good news, I live in my little village on the Chalk Downs, and a couple of years ago some French farmers came to see if they could move their champagne grapes to that part of Kent because they won't be able to grow them in Champagne. That feels like good news to me. But basically, to reiterate, this is not a nice to do. This is not a future issue. This is not some cranky set of policies. This is a profound current responsibility. Let me start with a few numbers. Let's celebrate some successes. Cost savings. When the SDC first started reporting on government practice in 2005, when we were first asked to be a scrutineer, the carbon footprint of government offices was rising rapidly compared to 1990. Last year, 2009, we were delighted to report that governments had achieved a 10% reduction in emissions from offices and had exceeded the target for emissions from administrative road vehicles. So that's just the road vehicles alone was £16 million savings. That reduction in road transport also achieved huge savings, not just on fuel costs, but it was the equivalent to 1,000 full-time staff in terms of time saved by people not travelling. When headcount starts to matter, which it is absolutely now, how many people are in jobs doing what and how do we do those things, then those kinds of savings are going to be profoundly important. 137,000 tonnes of waste diverted from landfill, 18 million cubic metres of water saved. There's a long list of achievements that are reductions in inefficiencies, maximising efficiencies, reductions of waste, different ways of doing things. If we look outside departments and look at the NHS, which of course I really like looking at the NHS because the numbers are huge. You know, the Red Army and the Indian Railway Service and the NHS are kind of the three big blocks of people on the planet. 75% of NHS trusts have signed up to the SDC's online model for improving efficiency and sustainability, and that is being rolled out across Scotland. One of the joys of that is not just that people can share best practice and see what's working, but using the model's principles, Cardiff and Vale NHS Trust saved £600,000 just in 1 year by getting carbon out of its system. Not completely, but it's on the right direction. Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health NHS Trust have saved £250,000 through looking at carbon emissions and waste in 1 year. Now, these are really serious numbers. They represent quick wins in a sense that this was achieved within 12 months. And importantly, it didn't involve huge amounts of investment. This is about doing things differently, not about investing. I've been quietly advised by somebody who knows at the top end of government that I'm not to use the word invest for the next 5 years in my conversations with government. Saving I can use a lot, but invest to save, even invest to save, doesn't really work so well. It's clear that the new government gets this and understands it as well, and it's a happy coincidence that these cost reductions, which are there and real and available, also match what we know we need to do in terms of the environment. So how did those achievements come about? A mixture of reasons. Some of it's technology. The obvious ones are the light bulbs and movement sensors, low-flow taps, more efficient cars, stopping drafts, replacing windows, new buildings. That list of technology stuff is there, and there's lots more to do, and we can continue to get that better. Some of it's a direct consequence of measuring things, measuring different things and measuring them better. As I'm sure some of you will be aware, we are a watchdog, and wearing our watchdog hat, the SDC has been watching what you do, I hope encouraging, supporting, cajoling. We use instruments like our SDAPs and SDIGs and various other acronyms to report both to you and to departments and to the public. A process that's not always welcomed, but it is always well-intentioned. It is absolutely clear that it's useful knowing what is happening so that you can change things. Some of it's been structural. The creation of CESP, Centre of Excellence in Sustainable Procurement, deliberately designed to ratchet up the impact, the improvements in government procurement practice. It's probably the most obvious example of a structural change. But I would also argue that sustainable development finding its way to job descriptions and is also part of that process. Increasing numbers of staff have it in the day job. Quite a lot of it, much of it, in fact, is behavioural. Partly this has been incentivised. It's been very striking to me that the presence of a sustainability element in permanent secretaries' KPIs and bonus calculations has a marked impact on their enthusiasm for the subject. Certainly on an annual basis, we get a sense that how departments are performing matters now. It also, I think, reflects a growing understanding on the part of huge numbers of people that this stuff matters, not just because their own personal performance, but it matters more broadly. And much of it comes about despite the system rather than because of it, despite the policies rather than because of it. I'm well aware of individuals and groups of people across government who are doing this because they know it's the right thing to do, and often it's not the easy option. It's the harder option. So I congratulate and applaud those that do.